Okay, now let's talk about section 2, the carbohydrates or the sugars. Here are some basic types of sugars here. And when you look at them, you'll notice they all have the same general formula. That is, they have one carbon to two hydrogens to one oxygen. And so your basic sugars or your sugar monomers will always have this ratio. And it might be C3H6O3 or C5H10O5. Now you notice these three are kind of interesting in that they each have the formula C6H12O6, but they have a different arrangement of these things. And so what do we call these kinds of molecules with the same formula but a different arrangement? These are a good example of isomers. These are sugar isomers, all with the same formula but a different arrangement of the atoms. Okay, so we can use a dehydration synthesis reaction to put a couple of these together. Oh, let's back up for a minute. So these sugar monomers, these are what are known as monosaccharides. Okay, so those are the monomers of sugars, monosaccharides. If you put a couple of these monosaccharides together using, again, a dehydration synthesis reaction, you now have two of them put together. You have what's known as a disaccharide, in this case sucrose or table sugar, which is a combination of glucose and fructose. You'll notice that glucose is also an isomer with these guys up here. It has that same general formula, C6H12O6. There's, as you can imagine, many ways to arrange those particular atoms. Now, if we put together three or more monosaccharides, we'll get what we call a polysaccharide. And so here we have starch, which is just a bunch of glucose molecules bonded together by these dehydration synthesis reactions, and these long chains that kind of can form these little curlicues, and they sometimes have a side branch. But you recall, here's our potato. So starch is the main component of potatoes, and you find it in other types of plants because it's how plants basically store the food that they've made, or store the sugars that they've made, is in the form of starch. And so when you eat things like French fries, you're getting a whole bunch of starch, which has lots of energy in it, as you can imagine. Now, animals take the carbohydrates that they consume and they store it in a different form. It's known as glycogen. Again, it's a long chain of glucose molecules, but it comes in these highly branched patterns. And we have an image of a liver here because we store most of our glycogen in our liver. It's taken out of the foods we eat, we store it in the liver, and then when we need some energy, we'll take out some of that glycogen and break it down and make use of those glucose molecules. Now, another type of polysaccharide that's important is what's known as cellulose, and it's found in plants, and plants use cellulose to construct their cell walls, and they form a very rigid structure. We'll see that, talk about that more later when we talk about cells. Now you'll notice, just like these other two, it's made of a bunch of glucose molecules, but the bonding is slightly different. So notice here with starch how the oxygen points down in all of them. Well, let's take a look at cellulose. There's a slight difference. They alternate. One's pointing up, one's pointing down, one's pointing up, etc., etc. Now, you might say to yourself, well, big deal. Well, actually, it is interesting and a big deal because, again, starch is this form that we can readily digest, and it's just sort of stored inside of cells, whereas cellulose is in the walls outside of the plant cells. And when we eat it, we can't digest it. It just goes straight through. It's part of the fiber that you find in your foods you eat. Celery would have a lot of cellulose in it, and a bran muffin or anything with whole wheat will have lots of cellulose in it. Any kind of leaves, spinach, lettuce, whatever, will have a little bit of cellulose in them. Okay, let's see. I guess that's it for carbohydrates.